Feeling bored? Imagine being an ancient Egyptian with no TV, no internet, and no air conditioning. How would you pass the time? Our ancestors faced this problem every day, and their solutions were creative, to say the least. But here's the thing. As we trace the evolution of entertainment from ancient times to today, we'll uncover a disturbing pattern. The human thirst for distraction has led us down some dark paths before. Are we about to make the same mistakes in the digital age? Picture this. An ancient Egyptian family gathered around a flickering fire as night falls over the Nile Valley. What are they doing? They're telling stories. These tales weren't just for entertainment. They were a matter of life and death. Seriously. In ancient societies, oral traditions were like a prehistoric survival guide. How else would you learn which berries were safe to eat or where the dangerous animals lurked? These stories passed down crucial information about food sources, potential dangers, and even social norms. It was like having a Wikipedia of survival knowledge, except it was all stored in people's heads. Storytelling changed how our brains work. When we hear a story, our brains light up. We're not just listening, we're experiencing. The same neural pathways activate as if we were actually living the events in the story. Pretty wild, right? This neurological impact made storytelling an incredibly effective tool for learning and memory. It's why you can probably still recite fairy tales from your childhood, but struggle to remember what you had for lunch yesterday. Our brains are wired for narrative. As societies grew more complex, so did their stories. People started weaving in elements of their culture, beliefs, and history. What began as practical knowledge transformed into epic sagas, creation myths, and legendary heroes. Over time, storytelling became more than just a way to pass on information. It became an art form in its own right. The best storytellers were revered in their communities, kind of like ancient celebrities. People would gather to hear these master wordsmiths weave their tales, hanging on every word. But storytelling wasn't just a spectator sport. It became a social activity with people sharing their own stories and experiences. It brought communities together, strengthening bonds and creating shared identities. In a world without modern technology, storytelling was the original way to connect. We're still hardwired for stories. From books to movies, we're constantly creating and consuming narratives. We're not so different from our ancient ancestors after all. Some people craved more excitement, more action, and that's where things started to get interesting. But that's a story for another time. Remember how ancient Egyptians weren't satisfied with just storytelling? Well, they came up with a solution that would make modern game designers green with envy. Imagine board games so important they were buried with pharaohs. These games weren't about simple entertainment. They were about life, death, and everything in between. When archaeologists opened King Tut's tomb, they found something unexpected among the golden treasures and mummified remains. Board games. Ancient Egyptians were so obsessed with their games, they took them to the afterlife. But why? What made these games so special? Enter Senet, the game of passing. Picture a grid with 30 squares, a handful of game pieces, and a dash of divine favor. Players race to move their pieces across the board, dodging obstacles and opponents along the way. Sound familiar? It's like ancient Egyptian chutes and ladders, but with way higher stakes. Senet represented the soul's journey through the afterlife. The final squares stood for the gates of the underworld. Talk about pressure. No wonder pharaohs wanted to practice in the afterlife. There was also Mayhen, played on a board shaped like a coiled snake. Players raced along the serpent's body, embodying the cyclical nature of life and death. These games were all about strategy, planning, and dealing with the unexpected. Sound like skills you'd want in a leader? The ancient Egyptians thought so too. Playing these games was seen as a way to sharpen the mind and prepare for life's challenges. These games weren't just for pharaohs and priests. As time went on, they spread to all levels of society. Imagine ancient Egyptian families gathered around a Senate board, much like we might play Monopoly today. It was a way to bond, to teach, to learn. The materials used for these games tell us a lot too. While pharaohs might have gold and ivory sets, common folk made do with wood or pottery. But the game itself? That was the same for everyone. In a highly stratified society, these games were a great equalizer. When these games went mainstream, they became more than just games. They were educational tools, teaching strategy and social values. They were icebreakers, bringing communities together. And they were a form of social commentary, reflecting the beliefs and concerns of the time. But as popular as these board games were, some people wanted more. They craved something more, physical, something with higher stakes and bigger thrills. And that's when things started to get really interesting. But that's a story for another square on the game board of history. Board games were just the start. As empires grew, so did their hunger for entertainment. Imagine 250,000 people gathered in one place, hearts racing with anticipation. What could bring together a crowd larger than most ancient cities? The answer might surprise you. Welcome to the world of ancient mass entertainment, where rulers faced a unique challenge, keeping enormous crowds entertained without modern technology. Their solution: build spectacular venues on an unprecedented scale. The Circus Maximus and the Colosseum were the crown jewels of Roman entertainment. These massive structures could hold hundreds of thousands of spectators, dwarfing even our largest modern stadiums. But what kind of spectacles could draw such enormous crowds? Let's start with chariot racing. Teams representing different factions competed in high-speed races that often ended in dramatic crashes. The crowds went wild, cheering for their favorites with unmatched passion. But that was just the warm-up. The main event? Gladiatorial contests. These were elaborate productions featuring highly trained warriors battling it out in front of thousands of bloodthirsty spectators. And if human-on-human combat wasn't enough, they'd throw in some exotic animals for good measure. Speaking of animals, the Romans also staged full-scale hunts right in the arena. Imagine watching a lion chase down a gazelle while sitting comfortably in your stadium seat. It was like a live-action nature documentary, but with a lot more blood. And just when you thought they couldn't top that, they'd flood the entire arena for mock naval battles. That's right, they turned the Colosseum into a giant pool for ships to duke it out. Talk about a multi-purpose venue. But it wasn't all blood and gore. The Romans also enjoyed theatrical performances in open-air theatres. These often included political themes and social satire, captivating audiences across all social classes. It was ancient comedy mixed with biting commentary. And let's not forget the festivals. The Romans loved their holidays, and they celebrated big. The Ludi Romani, held in honor of Jupiter, featured days of games, performances, and ceremonies. It combined elements of religious festivals, sporting events, and cultural celebrations all in one. Managing these events was no small feat, from crowd control to scheduling, from providing food and drink to cleaning up afterward. The logistics were mind-boggling. But for the rulers of Rome, it was all worth it. Because these spectacles weren't just about fun, they served a much bigger purpose. But that's a story for another time. The massive spectacles of ancient Rome weren't just about entertainment. There was a hidden agenda at play, all about maintaining power. Panem et circenses, bread and circuses, was more than a catchy phrase. It was the key to understanding how ancient rulers kept control over millions of people. Roman emperors used food and entertainment as a powerful political tool. When you're watching a thrilling chariot race or a gladiator fight, You're not thinking about your empty stomach or the latest political scandal. These rulers were smart. They knew that a populace focused on the next big show was less likely to revolt. Got some social unrest brewing. Time to announce a week-long festival. Mass entertainment also has a way of bringing people together, creating a shared experience. When thousands cheer for the same chariot team, they feel united. And a united populace is easier to control than a divided one. The emperors made sure everyone knew who to thank for the good times. Their names were plastered all over the venues, and they'd often make grand entrances at the games. It was ancient PR at its finest. Now, you might wonder if people saw through this. Even if some did, the allure of free food and spectacular shows was hard to resist. It's like knowing something's bad for you, but indulging anyway because it feels so good. How far would rulers go to keep the masses entertained? Pretty far, as it turns out. Some emperors would drain the treasury for increasingly extravagant shows. We're talking about flooding arenas for mock sea battles, importing exotic animals from far-flung corners of the empire, and putting on games that lasted for days or even weeks. Emperor Trajan once held games that lasted 123 days and involved 10,000 gladiators. That's a spectacle on an almost unimaginable scale. And it worked. The people loved it, and Trajan's popularity soared. But here's something interesting. Not all entertainment was state-sponsored. While the emperors were busy with their grand shows, a whole underground entertainment industry was thriving. And that's where things start to get really intriguing. But that's a story for another time. Let's shift our focus from emperors to the intense world of ancient athletics. Victory was sweet, but defeat. That could be downright agonizing in the arenas of Greece and Rome. Athletic competitions were a huge part of ancient life. The Olympic Games, held every 4 years to honor Zeus, weren't just about sports. They were religious festivals, showcasing human excellence and pleasing the gods. But these games were far from the controlled events we see today. Take the pancration, a brutal mix of boxing and wrestling that allowed almost anything except biting and eye gouging. Stepping into that ring meant facing an opponent who could use nearly any means to take you down. Injuries were common, with archaeological evidence showing fractures and joint injuries that would make modern sports doctors cringe. Chariot racing was another deadly spectacle. The Circus Maximus in Rome could hold up to 150,000 spectators, all watching as chariots raced at breakneck speeds. Crashes were frequent, sending drivers and horses tumbling across the track in a heart-stopping display of danger. But why did society accept such violent entertainment? It's not a simple answer. These competitions were deeply rooted in religion and culture. The Olympic Games included musical and poetic contests too, linking physical strength with artistic expression. Then there were the tales of legendary athletes like Milo of Croton, said to have carried a full-grown bull on his shoulders. True or not, these stories of superhuman feats captivated people, showing what the human body could achieve when pushed to its limits. The reality, though, was often harsh. Many athletes paid a high price for their moment of glory. But the promise of fame, religious significance, and sheer spectacle kept people coming back for more. It's a complex picture, isn't it? The celebration of human achievement mixed with the very real risk of serious injury or death. It's quite different from our modern sports with their safety regulations and medical teams on standby. But not all ancient entertainment was so physical. Some preferred to exercise their minds rather than their bodies. And that's where things get really intriguing. What happens when you mix philosophy, alcohol, and a bunch of ancient Greeks? We're about to find out. A group of elite men reclining on couches, sipping wine from ornate cups called Eclipses. But these aren't just any old drinking parties. These are symposia, the ancient Greek gatherings that shaped Western civilization as we know it. These weren't your average book clubs. The Greeks believed that alcohol, in moderation, could spark creativity and loosen tongues. So they combined intellectual discourse with social bonding in a way that would make modern think tanks jealous. What did they talk about? Everything. Philosophy, politics, love, you name it. Plato and Socrates dropped mind-bending ideas about reality and morality. Others debated democracy and justice, all fueled by wine and wit. They even discussed relationships, trying to untangle the complexities of human emotions. But it wasn't all serious business. These symposia also featured poetry, music, and party games. Ever tried flicking wine dregs at a target? It's like ancient Greek beer pong, but with a philosophical twist. Now, you might wonder how a bunch of tipsy thinkers changed the world. Well, these weren't just idle chats. The ideas sparked at symposia often became influential written works. Take Plato's famous dialogue, Symposium, which explores the nature of love through speeches at a drinking party. The impact of these gatherings on Western thought is massive. Many concepts we take for granted today, democracy, ethics, the nature of knowledge, got their start over wine in these symposia. They were like idea incubators, letting thinkers test out concepts before presenting them to the wider world. But let's not get too starry-eyed. These symposia were exclusive affairs, limited to elite men. Women, slaves, and common folk were shut out. It's a sobering reminder that even as these gatherings sparked revolutionary ideas, they were still products of an unequal society. So do we have anything like this today? We've got academic conferences and online forums, but do they capture that same mix of deep thought and social connection? Maybe there's something to be said for combining big ideas with a good drink, but that's a debate for another time. Let's move on to see how the rest of ancient society entertained themselves when they couldn't join these elite philosophical drinking parties. Ancient Greeks believed music could move mountains, and they weren't far off. In the ancient world, music was a force of nature, a bridge between worlds, and a tool of the gods. In ancient Egypt, music was essential. Imagine a grand temple ceremony, the air thick with incense. The haunting sound of a harp fills the air, joined by drums and flutes. For Egyptians, this was the voice of the gods, a way to communicate with the divine. Music even guided souls to the afterlife. Talk about high stakes for the musicians. These musicians were everywhere in ancient Egyptian society. Their images are all over ancient artwork, showing up in party scenes and religious ceremonies. Many were highly skilled professionals, respected members of society, dedicated to their craft. Now let's look at ancient Greece. Here, music and dance were inseparable. Greek music was a full-body experience, with dance troupes performing at religious ceremonies and public festivals, telling stories through movement and sound. The Greeks even developed a system of musical notation, allowing them to preserve and pass on musical works across generations. The Romans believed music could influence emotions. They had tunes for every mood and occasion, from public celebrations to religious ceremonies. It's like they had a playlist for everything. As societies grew more complex, so did their music. Simple rhythms and melodies became elaborate compositions. Professional musicians and dancers emerged, turning their skills into careers. But don't think this was all highbrow stuff. Picture rowdy taverns filled with laughter and off-key singing, or street performers drawing crowds with catchy tunes and fancy footwork. Music and dance in the ancient world were a universal language, connecting people with the divine, expressing emotions, and bringing communities together. But as powerful as music could be, some people craved even more excitement. And that's where things started to get interesting. But that's a story for another time. From divine melodies to divine comedy, but not the kind you'd expect. Ancient theatre had a side that would shock even modern audiences. The jokes that had ancient crowds howling with laughter would likely get you banned from social media today. Comedy was a big deal in ancient Greek and Roman theatre. Packed amphitheatres were filled with people eager for a good laugh. But their idea of funny was wildly different from ours. These ancient comedies were known for their shocking content. Playwrights pushed every boundary imaginable, mixing clever wordplay with outrageous scenarios. And surprisingly, audiences couldn't get enough of it. Aristophanes, the king of ancient Greek comedy, was a master of this style. His works weren't just entertainment, they were powerful social commentary. He used humor to challenge political norms and spark conversations about serious issues. The actors wore exaggerated masks with big, gaping mouths. This helped people in the back rows see their expressions, but it probably also made it easier to deliver those outrageous lines without breaking character. You might wonder how audiences reacted to all this. Did they storm out in disgust? Nope. These plays were hugely popular, drawing massive crowds. People couldn't get enough of the sharp satire and boundary-pushing humor. But why? Well, these comedies served as a release valve for societal tensions. In a world with strict social rules, comedy was a way to safely question norms and push boundaries. It was like a collective, we're all thinking it, might as well laugh about it moment. The influence of these ancient comedies is still felt today. They laid the groundwork for humor that's both entertaining and thought-provoking, a combination we still appreciate. So next time you encounter a bit of biting satire, remember, you're part of a tradition that goes back thousands of years. But comedy wasn't the only emotion ancient entertainment could stir up. In fact, some forms of entertainment aimed for quite the opposite effect. But that's a story that might just bring a tear to your eye. Imagine paying good money to feel terrible. Sounds crazy, right? But for ancient Greeks, it was the hottest ticket in town. Let's find out why they were lining up to have their hearts broken. Tragedy was a whole experience designed to take you on an emotional roller coaster. Picture this. You're sitting in a massive open-air theater surrounded by thousands of other spectators. The air is thick with anticipation. Then the chorus starts singing, setting the mood for the drama about to unfold. These weren't just any old stories. Greek tragedies dealt with some heavy stuff. Fate, justice, morality. You know, the big questions that keep you up at night. And the characters, they weren't your average Joes. We're talking about kings, heroes, and gods making some seriously bad decisions. But here's the weird part. People loved it. They'd flock to these performances, knowing full well they were in for an emotional beating. Why? Well, the Greeks had this idea called catharsis. It's like emotional house cleaning for your soul. When we watch tragedy, our brains release all sorts of chemicals. It's like an emotional workout. You flex those empathy muscles, shed a few tears, and come out feeling lighter. Tragedy played a huge role in shaping Greek society. These plays were performed at big religious festivals, with the whole city showing up. Imagine your entire community coming together to watch the same story, feeling the same emotions. That's some serious bonding right there. And let's not forget about the themes. Greek tragedies often tackled big social and political issues. It was a way to explore complex ideas in a safe space. You could question authority, ponder morality, and debate justice, all under the guise of watching a play. The chorus was like the voice of the people, commenting on the action and expressing collective emotions. They guided the audience on how to feel and react. So, did tragedy actually make ancient Greek society more empathetic and cohesive? It's hard to say for sure. But think about it, a whole city coming together regularly to experience intense emotions and ponder deep questions. That's got to have some impact, right? In the end, Greek tragedy was more than just entertainment. It was a tool for emotional release, social bonding, and collective reflection. Pretty deep stuff for a night out at the theatre, but not all ancient entertainment aimed for such lofty goals. Some folks preferred their fun a bit more down to earth, and that's where things get really interesting. But that's a story for another time. Tragedy not your thing. The ancient world had another thrilling pastime up its sleeve. Ever wonder how a simple game could shake empires and spark revolutions? Get ready, because we're diving into the world of ancient gambling. Gambling was an obsession that gripped civilizations from Rome to Egypt. People rolled dice, literally and figuratively, in pursuit of fortune. But it wasn't all fun and games. Gambling had the power to make or break lives. Think Vegas is wild? Ancient civilizations took it to another level. In Greece, people bet fortunes on sheep bones called astragaloi. Romans strategized over ludus latrunculorum, their version of chess. Dice games were so popular that archaeologists keep finding ancient dice in ruins. Talk about leaving a mark on history. The elite weren't immune to gambling fever. Greek aristocrats played kottabos, tossing wine dregs at targets. In Egypt, the game senet was believed to represent the journey to the afterlife. Imagine playing for your eternal soul. Now that's high stakes. How did authorities handle this gambling craze? It's complicated. Rome both embraced and restricted it. During certain religious festivals, gambling was forbidden to keep people focused on worship. But let's be real. People probably found ways around those rules. Rome had its share of famous gamblers, betting big on gladiator games and chariot races. These events were like the ancient Super Bowl, with fortunes changing hands in moments. Despite the excitement, gambling had serious consequences. It ruined lives, tore families apart, and even destabilized societies. That's why attempts to regulate it popped up throughout history, but telling people they can't do something often backfires. So next time you feel lucky, remember, you're part of a tradition older than the pyramids. But some forms of entertainment were beyond even the most daring gambler's control. What could possibly top the thrill of gambling? Well, that's a story written in the stars. Imagine seeing a total solar eclipse without knowing what it was. The sun, giver of life and light, suddenly swallowed by darkness in the middle of the day. For our ancient ancestors, these celestial events were messages from the gods, and they took them seriously. Natural phenomena like eclipses, comets, and meteor showers captivated and terrified people in the ancient world. It's hard for us to grasp that level of awe today. Picture an entire city falling silent as the moon slowly creeps across the sun's face, or the panic spreading as a comet blazes across the night sky, its tail stretching behind it. Different cultures had their own ways of reading these heavenly signs. The Babylonians were sky watchers extraordinaire. They kept meticulous records of lunar eclipses and planetary movements, using them to predict future events and guide their farming. It was like their own cosmic weather forecast. The ancient Chinese believed comets signaled big changes, often tying them to political upheavals. In 106 BCE, a comet sighting was interpreted as a sign of impending governmental collapse. Talk about high-stakes stargazing. But it wasn't all scary. Some cultures celebrated these events. Ancient Greeks held festivals during certain celestial alignments, seeing them as lucky times. Imagine throwing a party for the universe. Here's the kicker. Even as astronomical knowledge grew, the power of these omens remained strong. Roman Emperor Augustus, with access to top-notch astronomical info, still consulted astrologers before big decisions. It's like checking your horoscope before a job interview, but with an empire at stake. These celestial events could shape history. Roman historian Livy tells us about a solar eclipse in 390 BCE that freaked out Roman troops so much, they postponed their attack on the Gauls. A battle delayed because everyone's too busy staring at the sky. That happened. All this sky watching led to some impressive advances in astronomy. It also reinforced power structures. Rulers and priests who could predict or interpret these events held enormous sway over the people. They had a direct line to the gods, or so it seemed. In the end, these natural spectacles were a way for ancient people to make sense of their world. But as impressive as nature's light show was, some folks weren't content to just watch. They wanted to create their own spectacles, and that's where things get really interesting. While some ancients gazed at the stars, others hit the road. Ancient tourism was a wild ride that shaped economies and cultures in unexpected ways. Leisure travel in the ancient world wasn't just for the modern jet-setter. Wealthy folks have been sightseeing for thousands of years. The Romans, Greeks, and Egyptians all had their favorite spots, and they had their own version of TripAdvisor to guide them. Take Pausanias, for example. This Greek traveler wrote a detailed guide to Greece in the 2nd century AD. It was like an ancient lonely planet, describing everything from famous temples to local legends. Imagine planning your trip using a scroll instead of a smartphone. So where did these ancient tourists go? The pyramids of Egypt were a big draw, just like they are now. But so were the Oracle of Delphi in Greece and the Colosseum in Rome. These were religious sites, cultural landmarks, and sometimes even places to get a glimpse of the future. The ancients had hotels too, though not quite like what we're used to today. Archaeological evidence points to guest houses in major cities and tourist spots. These accommodations played a crucial role in supporting the burgeoning tourism industry. This early tourism had a significant impact on ancient economies. All those travelers needed food, lodging, and souvenirs. Cities and towns along popular routes flourished. It's like Las Vegas in the desert, but with more togas and fewer slot machines. The Greeks and Romans even built infrastructure to support all this travel. They constructed roads and way stations to make it easier for people to get around. It's like they invented the highway rest stop 2,000 years early. But not everyone in the ancient world was bitten by the travel bug. Some preferred their entertainment a little closer to home. And that's where things get really interesting. Ever wonder how people pass the time without Netflix or social media? Well, it turns out they had a secret weapon that's been lost in the digital age. But that's a story for another time. Imagine a society where speaking well could make you a superstar. Not modern podcasters or YouTubers, but ancient times when mastering conversation was a matter of life and death. In ancient times, conversation was the entertainment. No smartphones, no TV, no social media. What would you do all day? You'd talk. And the ancients turned it into an art form. They took this seriously. In ancient Greece and Rome, rhetoric was a cornerstone of education. Young men spent years studying the art of effective speaking. They learned to argue, persuade, and move people with words. Why was it so important? Your ability to speak well could make or break you. Want to win a court case? Better be a good speaker. Want to influence politics? You'd need to know how to work a crowd. It was like a superpower. Let's talk about some ancient smooth talkers. Cicero was the rock star of Roman oratory. His speeches could sway public opinion and even take down conspiracies. When he spoke against Catiline's plot to overthrow the Roman Republic, his words basically saved the government. Then there's Demosthenes, the Greek orator who could rally Athens against Philip of Macedon. His speeches were like a call to arms, inspiring people to stand up against a powerful enemy. But it wasn't just big political speeches. The art of conversation shaped everyday life too. Greek symposia were drinking parties where men discussed philosophy, politics, and art. These weren't just boozy chats. They were intellectual hotspots where ideas were born and debates raged. All this talking created societies that valued quick thinking and persuasive arguments. It's why we still study these ancient orators today. Their techniques for persuasion and ways of structuring arguments are still influencing how we communicate. But sometimes, even the most eloquent words weren't enough. Some people craved a different kind of excitement, and that's where things start to get really interesting. You might think hunting is all about patience and stealth, but in the ancient world, it was a different game entirely. Picture massive parks teeming with exotic animals, elaborate rituals, and hunts so extravagant they'd make today's safaris look tame. Welcome to the world of ancient hunting, where boredom met its match in the most unexpected ways. For the elite of the ancient world, hunting was a spectacle, a show of power, and high-stakes entertainment. The ancient Egyptians created enormous hunting parks filled with animals for sport. These weren't your average deer stands in the woods. We're talking about controlled environments where nobles could flex their hunting muscles without breaking a sweat. In Egypt, hunting scenes in ancient art show pharaohs and nobles taking down everything from antelopes to lions. These weren't just random doodles, they were carefully crafted images meant to show off the power and skill of the hunters. But here's where it gets really interesting. In ancient Egypt, a successful hunt was seen as a blessing from the gods. It's like they thought bagging a big game was a divine pat on the back. Can you imagine the pressure? You're not just trying to impress your hunting buddies, but the entire pantheon of gods. The Greeks and Romans had their own spin on things. For them, hunting was closely tied to military training. Young Greek men saw it as a rite of passage, a way to prove their worth and develop skills for warfare. It's like they were playing the world's most dangerous game of laser tag, but with real weapons and real consequences. The Romans took hunting to new heights of extravagance. They imported exotic animals from all corners of their empire for elaborate hunts. We're talking elephants, tigers, and even polar bears. It was like a deadly zoo with less safety regulations. As societies grew more complex and food became more readily available, hunting shifted from a survival skill to a leisure activity. But it kept its prestige. Being a good hunter was still seen as a mark of courage, skill, and social status. The impact of these ancient hunting traditions, it's all around us. From the way we view certain animals as game to the very concept of wildlife preserves, we're still living with the echoes of these ancient practices. But for some, even the thrill of the hunt wasn't enough. They craved an even more intense rush, a different kind of prey. And that's where things start to get really wild. Gladiatorial combat in ancient Rome wasn't always about entertainment. Surprisingly, it started as a way to honor the dead, a funeral rite that eventually took on a life of its own. Over time, these small, private affairs evolved into massive public spectacles, drawing crowds of up to 50,000 people. Imagine filling a modern sports stadium to watch people fight to the death. The gladiators themselves were a diverse bunch. You had the retiarius with his net and trident, and the mamillo with heavy armor, sword, and shield. Each type had their own strengths and weaknesses, creating a deadly game of strategy. But here's something that might surprise you. Being a gladiator wasn't all doom and gloom. Sure, their life expectancy was pretty short, but they had a certain status in Roman society. They were like the rock stars of their day, complete with fans and even product endorsements. Can you picture a gladiator selling togas? So how did Romans justify this bloody entertainment? Well, it's complicated. Many gladiators were slaves or prisoners of war, so their lives were seen as expendable. But there was also this idea that gladiatorial combat showcased virtues Romans admired: courage, skill, and grace under pressure. It was like a deadly morality play. Let's not sugarcoat it, though. These games were brutal. The relationship between violence, honor, and entertainment in Roman culture was complex and often contradictory. They celebrated the spectacle of combat and the glory of victory, while watching real people die for their amusement. In the end, gladiatorial combat tells us a lot about Roman culture, their values, social structure, and attitude towards life and death. But the arena wasn't just for human combatants. The Romans had even more exotic entertainment in store. What could be more thrilling than gladiators? We'll find out soon enough. You think modern zoos are impressive? The Romans would laugh. Their animal entertainment makes our wildlife parks look tame. We're talking about a spectacle so massive it threatened entire species. How far would the Romans go for exotic thrills? Imagine an entire ecosystem crammed into the Colosseum, ready for the crowd's amusement. The Romans wanted to see animals fight, hunt, and die. It was bloody, but it captivated audiences across the empire. Getting these animals into the arena was no small feat. The Romans developed a whole industry around capturing and transporting wild beasts from Africa, Asia, and beyond. They brought everything from lions and tigers to elephants and rhinos. Think about moving an angry rhino across the Mediterranean or feeding hungry lions for months at sea. It required specialized ships, cages, and handlers. But this wasn't just entertainment. It was a show of Rome's power and reach. Every exotic animal in the arena reminded people of the empire's vast territories and ability to control nature. During the Colosseum's inauguration in 80 AD, over 9,000 animals were killed. That's right, 9,000 in one event. The variety was astounding, from deer and boars to ostriches and crocodiles. This appetite for exotic beasts put immense pressure on wildlife across the empire and beyond. Some species were pushed to the brink of extinction. It's a stark reminder of how entertainment can have far-reaching consequences. The legacy of these spectacles goes beyond numbers. They shaped how we view animals. The idea of wild beasts as entertainment, as something to be conquered and controlled, still echoes in our modern world. From circuses to wildlife tourism, we're still figuring out how to balance our fascination with animals and their welfare. The Romans' obsession with animal spectacles reveals a lot about their society, their love of grandeur, need to dominate nature, and complex relationship with the wild. But even these incredible shows couldn't satisfy everyone. Some people wanted something more, something even grander, and that's where things get really interesting. From bloodthirsty arenas to binge-watching marathons, our quest for entertainment has evolved. But has it really changed that much? The ancient world might have more in common with your Netflix queue than you'd expect. Let's explore the surprising similarities between how our ancestors killed time and how we do it today. Entertainment isn't just a pastime. It's a mirror reflecting society's values, fears, and desires. And that mirror has stayed pretty consistent over the millennia. Take gladiatorial combat and modern combat sports. We're still watching people push their physical limits for our amusement. The stakes might be lower, but the thrill remains the same. Those ancient Greek tragedies. We're not gathering in amphitheaters for Oedipus anymore, but we're still obsessed with drama. The popularity of intense TV series and true crime shows proves we're still after that emotional catharsis the Greeks sought. Roman circuses with chariot races have their modern counterparts in high-speed motorsports. The need for speed and the allure of danger haven't disappeared. They've just gotten faster and louder. Even celebrity culture has ancient roots. Gladiators were the rock stars of their day, complete with fans and endorsement deals. Now we have athletes and actors in that spotlight. The faces have changed, but our fascination with larger-than-life figures persists. Why do we keep coming back to these forms of entertainment? It's about fulfilling basic psychological needs, distraction from daily worries, excitement to break monotony, and connection with others through shared experiences. These needs have remained constant since ancient times. We've just found new ways to satisfy them. In many ways, we're not so different from our ancient ancestors. We still love a good story, get a rush from competition, and use entertainment to make sense of our world. From ancient amphitheaters to modern living rooms, we're all just looking for that next captivating show. So what does this continuity in entertainment mean for us today? Well, that's where things get really interesting. From simple stories around a fire to gladiators battling for their lives, we've seen how ancient entertainment evolved to satisfy our deepest needs. It's about connection, catharsis, and making sense of our world. Think about your own entertainment habits. As you scroll through social media or binge your favorite shows, are you really so different from those ancient spectators? We're still chasing that emotional release, that shared experience, that glimpse into other lives and worlds. By understanding our past, we gain insight into our present entertainment landscape. The amphitheaters and forums of yesterday still echo in our modern platforms. Our ancient ancestors sought fulfillment through stories and spectacles, just as we do today. This journey through time reveals a simple truth. While the methods may change, our fundamental desires for entertainment remain remarkably constant.